Hey guys, we're back again for this, the second installment of my video tutorials for the Yamaha FZ1 second generation. This is the 06 to the 09 models. In this segment, we're going to look at changing or replacing the sub-throttle plates, commonly referred to as modifying the flies. Now you may have some questions about this before you get started, so let's answer these questions. Number one, what are the sub-throttle plates or flies and what do they do? Sub-throttle plates are four aluminum discs that sit in the intake tract above the throttle plates and are operated by a servo motor, which in turn is controlled by the bike's ECU or electronic control unit. In operation, these plates are open and closed at specific points in the RPM range to reduce airflow and thus restrict the FZ1's potential power. The modification of these plates reduces their overall diameter, which allows more air to be drawn into the motor sooner, thus allowing for more power in the mid-range. Before we get to the video, let me explain what you're about to see. I have modded my flies two separate ways. The first way I did it was I took the stock flies out of the bike, cut them down. These are the remnants of what is left off of the stock fly, and rounded them off and put them back in the bike. Well, I'm going to show you how I did this. If, however, you don't care to mod your own flies and you want to buy some stock aftermarket ones, I'm sure there's plenty out there. I made these. They're basically just the same size, but I've put little wings to fill in those areas on the spindles. I'm going to show you how I install these. These are exactly the same thickness as the stock flies at 40 thousandths or 1 millimeter. So either way you go, modding your flies is going to give you big gains. You're going to love this. So let's go ahead and get to the video. I'm going to show you what I do here, and check this out. Begin by removing the two large bolts on either side of the front fairing using a 4mm driver. Do this for both sides of the fairing. Next, use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the two remaining bolts that hold the inner fairing in place, one at the bottom and one at the top. The inner fairings could now be removed from the left and from the right. Using the same 4mm driver, remove the two bolts at the base and side of the front tank cover. Again, do this on both sides. Use a 5mm driver to remove the large center hex bolt. Then the forward tank cover can be removed. Take off the seat cowl and the driver's seat. Remove the two mounting bolts on either side of the fuel tank using a 5mm drive. Once these are out, the fuel tank can be lifted and propped into position as shown using a length of wooden dowel. Now at this point, you're ready to get to the airbox, but for filming purposes, I'm going to go ahead and remove the entire fuel tank. Unplug the air temperature sensor at the top of the airbox and then pull the rubber airline at its base. The top of the airbox is held in place with large screws placed around its perimeter and a single one found in the recess where the air temperature sensor is mounted. Once these screws are out, you can go ahead and remove the entire airbox cover. Now, use a 4mm driver to remove the 6 screws that secure the velocity stacks to the top of the intake tracks. Then you can pull the whole airbox along with the air filter and stacks off the bike. Okay, there are two tools that are critical for this operation, and if you don't have them, you need to go buy them. The first is a heat source. I use a small torch, but a soldering iron will suffice if you do not have one. And the second is a number 0 Phillips head screwdriver in good condition. I begin by applying heat directly to the head of the screw. It doesn't take a lot, just enough to loosen the thread locker. Then insert the driver into the screw, making sure that it is true perpendicular, and just twist it out. These are small screws and it does not take a lot of force to break the screws loose, but it does require the right tools. And when you have that, it's a snap. Once the first screw is out, just repeat the process for the remaining 7 screws. Heat it, break it loose, remove it, and move on to the next. Now what you are seeing is actually the first time I attempted to remove these little screws. Well, I've heard all of the horror stories. I got to tell you, there was really nothing to it. In fact, after I removed the screws for the first time, I reinstalled them with thread locker, removed and reinstalled them a total of 2 more times when I replaced these modded flies with my new CNC flies, which you will see here in just a minute. And I am still using the original screws. Once all the screws have been removed, use small pieces of tape across the spindles as shown. This will hold the flies in place when they are rotated to the vertical and keep them from falling into the throttle bodies. Remove the tape and pull out the stock flies. cut the flies down, I first measured the original plate and subtracted the diameter I wanted the new flies to be, which was 38 millimeters or roughly 1.5 inches. Then I divided this number by 2, which gave me the amount I wanted to remove from the perimeter of the stock fly. I set my micrometer to the distance and then just scored a line all the way around the outside of this plate. Using 10 snips, the soft thin aluminum cuts very easily. You don't have to be precise, but when cutting, make sure not to go over the line. Repeat the process for the remaining plates, then use a couple of 632 bolts and nuts to clamp all 4 plates together. Make sure the top one has a score line on the outside. Now I use a coarse file to smooth the edges of all 4 plates down to the score line. A quick sanding with some 400 grit paper takes the edge off the plates and leaves a nice finish on them. Now you're ready to reinstall your modded flies. Reinstall the flies into the spindle using tape to temporarily hold them in place. Now rotate the flies down either by turning on the ignition or simply turning the large nut on the servo motor. Then remove the tape. Go ahead and pre-position the flies by aligning the holes in the plates with those of the spindle. Use a drop of thread locker in each of the holes before installing the screws. It just takes a little, so don't overdo it. Now begin installing the screws, but do not tighten any of them until you have all 8 screws started. This will allow you to make small adjustments in the alignment before tightening. Once they're all in place, give a final twist to each of the screws and you're ready to button the bike back up. To finish up, replace the lower airbox half and tighten the 6 screws holding the velocity stack. Place the upper airbox half into position and reinstall the large screws, the rubber air hose at the base, and the air temperature sensor line. Install the fuel tank, the driver's seat, and the rear seat cowl. Then comes the front tank and the left and right inner fairings, and that's it, you're done. So that's it. That's all there is to it. Now you know how to mod the flies. In upcoming episodes, I'm going to be looking at the PC3 airbox, taking the stock muffler off, putting on a slip-on, gutting the cat, and a whole lot more. Also, I've got John Daddy 82. He's going to bring his bike in, and we're going to videotape all kinds of performance mods on his bike, including changing the chain, the sprockets, the brakes, pads, rotors, bleeding the whole brake system. A lot of good stuff there. We're also going to go down to the drag strip with John, and he's going to show us what he does, and we're going to do a whole episode of drag racing. It's going to be incredible. So stick around. We'll see you next time.